Can you be addicted to bread? Are you the person who says, I can quit sugar, but don't ask me to quit my bread? Today, I want to talk about the concept of grain addiction and how eating foods like bread, pasta, cereal, and other wheat products can be negatively impacting our brain and bodies, and yes, contributing to food addiction. So let's clarify, what exactly are grains? Grains refer to the seeds of certain grasses that are cultivated for food. The most common grains in the Western diet are wheat, corn, rice, oats, barley, and rye. We consume grains in many forms: bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, baked goods, and more. But there is growing evidence that for some people, grains, especially the gluten, can have drug-like effects on the brain and drive overeating behaviors that resemble addiction. He claims that the lectins, which are found in grains like wheat, barley, corn, can bind to our opioid receptors, triggering the release of dopamine as well as endorphins, which then make us feel good and crave more. They are the engine of the addiction itself. They spark the release of dopamine in the brain's reward pathways, which then reinforce consumption. Not only that, but they also impact hormones, our hunger hormones like ghrelin and insulin, and then our satiety hormone leptin, all of which disturb the hunger signals or dysregulate it. And on top of that, they also, grains, trigger inflammation, which can contribute to cognitive decline. So in susceptible individuals, not everybody, but in susceptible individuals, regularly consuming grains, especially in processed forms, can keep driving the addiction cycle. And then therefore, the person will become sicker and sicker, heading towards metabolic syndrome. And if you read William Davis's book, not only metabolic syndrome of the body, but also in the brain, for example, Alzheimer's. Now, it's important to note that this is not established science. Medical science has not gone to this state, but Davis in his book claims, yes, you can be addicted to bread, and read my book and you will find the research that substantiates that. But it's not just he who said this. Remember the quote attributed to Paracelsus, a renowned physician way back who actually used the phrase, bread is solid beer and beer is liquid bread. He was also trying to highlight how grains induce the similar intoxicating effects as alcohol, leading to cravings and overconsumption. While we wait for the scientists to gather the evidence, what do we find in the clinical realm? Because many of us in the clinical realm certainly will say, yes, not for everybody, but for a large number of people, grains can be addictive, particularly the refined grains that we see in products like bread, cereal, muffins, cake. So what are the signs that you yourself may have experienced? How do you know if you're addicted to grains? Do you have the cognitive effect? Now, there may be that numbing pleasure of the endorphin and dopamine impact. That's the buzz, the slight high. But you may also experience brain fog and mood swings. Now, these are typical of the cognitive and psychological aspects of addiction. You'll have intense cravings and find grains very difficult to resist or moderate. Think chips, cookies. Can you stop at just one? Do you have withdrawal symptoms when you stop suddenly, like headaches and fatigue and nausea and, of course, craving? Do you eat more? Or do you eat them even when you're full, even when you're bloated, even when you've had enough, you still haven't had enough? Do you feel successful in trying to cut back on the chips? Do you spend excessive time obtaining or consuming the foods or just feeling sick? Do you try to control your portions and you can't? These are all the hallmarks of addiction that I've talked about many times. Cravings, tolerance, do you need more to get the same effect, withdrawal, and loss of control? Now, if you've had this experience with chips and cakes and cookies, you know what I'm talking about. And it's not just the sugar. Here's an interesting point. Humans did not evolve eating high volumes of grains in the way that many of us consume them today. Our modern high-carb diets have created something of an evolutionary mismatch with our biology. For much of history, grains were scarce, and then, therefore, while they existed, they were not addictive. But they've become addictive of late because of the abundance and the refinedness of them. Today's refined grains and sugars make up 70% of people's calories. That is just too much. Our brains and our hormones are not equipped to handle this dramatic influx. hence the response, metabolic syndrome in the body, addiction in the brain. For those displaying signs of grain addiction, experts like Dr. William Davis suggest eliminating all wheat and gluten-free products for 30 days. This grain break will allow the brain and body to reset our hormonal dysregulation and break the addiction cycle. Many sensitive individuals will then decide to permanently adopt a grain-free lifestyle because they feel better. They have less cravings, less digestive issues, less brain fog, and just feel generally really good. Frankly, that would be like eating the way we did hundreds of years ago. So in summary, yes, grains like bread and pasta can be addictive and can drive overconsumption. Paying attention to your own reaction to grains and being willing to experiment by quitting them is definitely worth the effort, especially if you're having a problem keeping your food addiction in check. Just quitting the sugar may not be enough. Now, let's listen to what William Davis himself has to say about grains and addiction. Thank you. Davis actually calls wheat Frankenwheat and says that it's as toxic and as addictive as other drugs.
Right. So one of the things to understand is that grains, like wheat, are seeds of grasses. And humans simply don't have the digestive enzymes to break down the proteins in the seeds of grasses. So they choose strains that have greater wheat germ or gluten, not recognizing that it is a potent bowel toxin. But in its course from mouth to toilet, it's extremely toxic to the human gastrointestinal tract. So these peptide fragments have opioid properties. They bind to the opioid receptors of the human brain. Gliadin also is the initiating factor in many, if not most, autoimmune diseases. And then there's amylopectin A, carbohydrate unique to wheat and grains, that is more digestible than table sugar. So if we're told eat more healthy whole grains, you're being told to eat foods that raise blood sugar and thereby insulin to very high levels. Appetite stimulant, gliadin-derived opioid peptides, coupled with the amylopectin A, insulin and glucose raising properties. And so I often say that 2 slices of whole wheat bread raise blood sugar higher than 6 teaspoons of table sugar. So it's actually worse than sugar in some respects.
So like I said, we've been attributing that to the sugar component, but you're very explicit about how there's an opioid effect in wheat, and that causes an opioid withdrawal, as well as the slight buzz that you get when you eat wheat.
There has been a 4-fold increase in celiac disease, likely due to the changes introduced into the gliadin protein. That's just the tip of the iceberg. It's more addictive. I hate to say one, they're both bad.